Heroes don't always wear capes, and sometimes the strongest voices are the quietest ones in the room. This story isn't about fame, it's about courage, dignity, and doing what's right when it matters most. The rain had just started to fall when Vin Diesel stepped out of his rental car and into the small parking lot of Green Mart, a quiet neighborhood convenience store tucked between a shuttered barber shop and a payday loan office on the east side of Jacksonville, Florida. The sky was a dull stretch of gray, the kind that made everything feel slower, heavier. With his hoodie pulled low and wireless earbuds tucked in, though playing nothing, Vin moved like a man trying to disappear. No press, no fans, no movie sets. Just a grocery list with 4 things: eggs, almond milk, bananas, and protein bars. It had been a long week of travel and press junkets, and all he wanted was a moment of quiet. He preferred places like this, out of the spotlight, where the hum of refrigerators and the soft shuffle of sneakers on linoleum made more sense than headlines and flashing cameras. Inside, the store was mostly empty, save for a teenage cashier scrolling through her phone and a couple of older men debating scratch-off tickets near the register. Vin walked past them, head down, unaware that by the time he reached the back of the store, everything was about to change. Near the far end of the store, at the self-checkout kiosk closest to the exit, stood Aaliyah Monroe, a young woman in her early 30s with the exhausted eyes of someone who'd been holding everything together for far too long. Her once bright school cafeteria uniform had faded to a tired shade of blue, the collar slightly frayed, the logo on her chest nearly rubbed off. She held her purse close with one hand while the other gently steadied her son Malik, a 4-year-old with soft curls and a dinosaur backpack that looked too big for his small shoulders. Aaliyah was scanning a carton of milk, a box of cereal, and a pack of baby wipes, her hands trembling slightly as she fumbled with her EBT card. Malik clung to her leg, thumb in mouth, wide eyes watching everything. She kept her head down, as if hoping invisibility might protect her from judgment, from questions, from stares. Aaliyah didn't speak, didn't apologize, didn't explain. She just moved through the motions of survival. The machine beeped in protest, her card declined once, then again. She exhaled through her nose, trying not to show panic. Behind her, the line grew. A man cleared his throat, annoyed. Another woman shifted her cart and avoided eye contact. Aaliyah's shoulders tightened, her mind racing not just about the groceries, but about what would come next. Did she have enough gas to get home? Would she have to put something back? She looked down at Malik, who offered her nothing but quiet trust, and it made the moment ache even more. A mother trying to make ends meet, feeding her child on borrowed time and borrowed grace, stood alone under flickering lights, the weight of invisible judgment pressing down on her like humidity. She wasn't asking for pity, just a moment to get through the line, pay for her groceries, and go. She had learned long ago that dignity wasn't granted. It had to be defended in silence. And though she didn't know it yet, someone had noticed. Someone watching from just a few aisles away had seen enough, and he wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. The tension in the store shifted the moment Trevor, Kyle, and Blake entered the checkout line behind Aaliyah. Dressed in oil-stained jeans and work boots, the 3 men looked like they'd come straight from a warehouse or job site, trailing the smell of sweat and cheap energy drinks. Loud from the start, their conversation bounced off the high ceilings, peppered with profanity and forced laughter, but it wasn't long before their attention zeroed in on Aaliyah. Trevor, the largest of the 3 with a sunburned neck and camo ball cap, smirked as he held up a can of beans. "Think I can pay for this with charm?" he asked, his voice just loud enough to draw glances. Kyle snorted, then leaned toward Blake and muttered, "She's probably teaching her kid how to hustle the system, respect the grind." The words landed like darts, sharp and mean, soaked in mockery. Aaliyah didn't respond. She simply lowered her gaze and tried again with her card. But that wasn't enough for them. Blake, chewing gum with a permanent smirk, added, "Bet she's got 3 baby daddies. 1 for every flavor of wick." Their laughter rang out, sharp and cruel, designed to humiliate, not entertain. Other shoppers froze, some turned away, pretending to read labels or check their phones. A couple at the next register whispered between themselves but said nothing. Even the teenage cashier behind the podium looked down, pretending not to hear, her fingers nervously tapping the touchscreen. Aaliyah stood still, shoulders tensing with every word, her son burying his face into her leg. Malik's small fingers clenched the fabric of her pants like he was trying to disappear. The mockery wasn't just racial, it was personal, economic, calculated to strip her of dignity. The men didn't care that a child was watching. That was the point. Their performance was for dominance, for cruelty, and for the silence that had always let them get away with it. And as their laughter echoed again, just a little too loud, a little too smug, someone else in the store finally stopped pretending not to hear. The silence that had protected them for so long was about to be broken. From the far end of the frozen foods aisle, Vin Diesel paused, a carton of almond milk in one hand, his other still loosely gripping the handle of a half-filled basket. The laughter had cut through the quiet hum of the store like a siren, jarring, mean, unmistakable. At first, he didn't move, he just listened. The taunts weren't the loud, aggressive kind that would bring over security. They were the insidious type, laced with mockery and sarcasm, designed to humiliate without consequence. Vin's eyes shifted toward the self-checkout lane where he spotted Aaliyah, her back slightly hunched, one arm protectively around her son. The child's head was buried in her hip, and Vin saw the way Aaliyah was trying desperately to pretend the comments didn't sting, to maintain her composure, to keep moving. But her hands were shaking. Her card had already failed once. The men behind her were getting louder, bolder. Vin's reflection stared back at him from the freezer door, hood pulled low, jaw tight, eyes no longer passive. He had seen this before. Not in a film, in real life. His mother had once been that woman, exhausted, doing her best, humiliated in public while strangers looked away. He had been that child, watching, absorbing, learning, far too young that dignity was something you had to protect when no one else would. The memory returned so vividly it nearly knocked the air from his lungs. His mother's trembling hands as she counted out coupons, the way her voice tightened when someone made a snide remark behind her, the way everyone around them chose not to see. The silence in the store mirrored the silence of his own childhood, a crowd of witnesses pretending they couldn't hear. But Vin heard it. He felt every syllable like a weight on his chest. It wasn't about ego or reputation or the 1,000 roles he'd played on screen. This moment demanded no character, just conviction. The basket in his hand suddenly felt heavy, irrelevant. He set it down beside the cold drinks cooler, and in that moment, the man known around the world for playing heroes understood something simple and brutal. This wasn't a role, this was real, and he was done being just a witness. Vin set his basket down slowly, the almond milk landing with a soft thud beside the cooler. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. There was no music swelling in the background, no dramatic spotlight, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the murmurs of people trying not to look. He walked down the aisle like a shadow unfolding, calm and deliberate, cutting through the charged silence until he stood just a few feet behind the three men. "Let her pay," Vin said, voice low but steady. "Then walk away." The men turned, confused at first, then amused. Trevor, the largest, narrowed his eyes and scoffed. "You talking to us?" Vin didn't blink. "Yeah, you heard me." The tone wasn't threatening, it was controlled, like a man who knew exactly what he could do and didn't need to prove it. Kyle stepped forward, trying to puff himself up. "Mind your business, bro." Vin took a step closer. "This is my business. When 3 grown men decide to bully a mother in front of her kid, I make it mine." A shift happened then, not in volume but in gravity. The laughter stopped. The kind of stillness that made people forget to breathe settled over the checkout lines. Even the cashier, frozen at her station, looked up. Blake, perhaps feeling the moment slipping away from him, decided to push back, literally. He shoved Vin in the chest hard enough to assert dominance. But Vin didn't move. He absorbed the contact like a wall, unshaken. Then, in one fluid motion, he stepped forward, grabbed Blake's wrist, twisted it just enough to bring him to one knee. No pain, just pressure. It was practiced, clean, and final. The store fell completely silent. No yelling, no dramatics, just quiet authority. "I'm not here to hurt you," Vin said, calm and cold, "but I could. Think about that." Then he released him, and Blake stumbled back to his feet, face flushed with shame, jaw tight. His eyes darted around the store, searching for dignity, and finding none. Trevor and Kyle didn't say another word. They backed away quickly, their swagger gone, replaced by the sheepish posture of boys who'd been caught doing something they didn't want their fathers to see. Aaliyah stood frozen, debit card still trembling in her hand, lips parted in disbelief. She didn't recognize the man in the hoodie, not yet. She just saw someone do what no one else had, stand between her and humiliation. Vin looked at her gently, his voice softening. "You okay?" She nodded once, barely, tears just behind her eyes but refusing to fall. Malik peeked up from her hip, thumb out of his mouth now, watching Vin like he wasn't sure if he was real. For the first time in minutes there was no laughter in the store, only silence, thick with something unspoken. The tension didn't vanish. It unraveled slowly, like fog lifting after a storm. Aaliyah stood still, her breathing uneven, debit card still clutched in her hand as if she didn't trust the moment to be real. Her fingers trembled slightly, knuckles pale, like her body hadn't yet caught up with the relief. Vin didn't move closer, just watched her with steady eyes, letting her find her footing again. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "Just finish up, get home safe." His voice was softer now, stripped of confrontation, carrying something gentler. Permission to breathe. She bent to retrieve the box of cereal she'd dropped during the commotion, but her hand missed. Her grip faltered, her focus still caught somewhere between shame and disbelief. Before she could try again, Vin crouched beside her, picked it up and placed it gently into her cart. Then he added, not loud but with intention, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving." Aaliyah froze. She blinked. "What?" she whispered, confused, like no one had ever said those words to her before, not in public, not without judgment. Vin met her gaze. "I saw you looking down like you had to justify using that card. You don't. You're doing what you have to do for your son. That's enough. That's more than enough." For a long beat, she said nothing, just nodded, her throat too tight to speak, her jaw clenched like it was holding back more than tears. A woman, maybe in her 60s, stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered, clutching a modest handbag. "I'll walk her out," she said firmly. "She's had enough for today." Aaliyah gave a small nod of gratitude and adjusted Malik on her hip. The register beeped as her card was finally accepted. The groceries slid into a paper bag. Malik wrapped both arms around her neck like he wasn't letting go. As they reached the door, Aaliyah looked back. Her voice cracked, but her words were clear. "I didn't think anyone would say anything. I didn't think anyone ever did." Vin gave a quiet nod. They should have, and they should now. By the time Vin stepped out into the rain-soaked parking lot, the moment had already begun to ripple beyond the walls of Greenmart. Unbeknownst to him, Jaden, a high school junior lingering in the candy aisle, had recorded the entire encounter on his phone, starting from the first cruel comment to the exact second Vin took control. The clip hit social media within an hour. No flashy angles, no filters, no background music, just raw, unscripted reality. In the video, Vin's face was partially shadowed by his hoodie, but the voice was unmistakable. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving," he said as he helped Aaliyah gather her groceries. That single line, quiet and matter-of-fact, struck a nerve. It was reposted thousands of times within hours, then tens of thousands. News outlets picked it up, influencers quoted it beneath selfies, politicians tried to spin it into messaging for campaigns. Some called him a hero, others tried to diminish the act as performance. But Vin stayed silent. His phone buzzed with missed calls, texts from people he hadn't heard from in years, and mentions from media personalities wanting him on air. He ignored all of it. He hadn't done it for attention, and he wasn't going to perform now. This wasn't a press tour or a promo cycle. It wasn't a scene to rehearse or a role to inhabit. For him, it wasn't a viral moment. It was just something a man should do when no one else would. Still, the world had already decided. Vin Diesel wasn't trending because of a blockbuster. He was trending because in a quiet store in a forgotten part of town, he chose to stand when everyone else chose to stay silent. And that kind of presence couldn't be manufactured. It had to be real. That night, after Malik had fallen asleep beside her on the couch, Aaliyah finally allowed herself to open the message her coworker had sent earlier. A video clip. She didn't recognize it at first, but then she saw herself, frozen at the checkout, card trembling, voice silent. She saw Malik clinging to her side. She heard their laughter again, the shame flooding back like it had never left. But then she saw him, the man in the hoodie, the stranger who stepped in, and her own voice, small, shaken, saying, "I didn't think anyone would say anything." She watched it again, and again. Not out of vanity, but out of disbelief. Someone had captured the exact moment her dignity was defended. It felt surreal, watching herself from the outside, not as a struggling mom trying to make it through the day, but as someone seen. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She felt human again. With trembling hands, she opened her notes app and began to write. She wrote about the layoff from her school job, about cleaning motel rooms to cover groceries, about the weight of pulling out her EBT card in public and the sting of whispered judgment. She wrote about Malik asking her one night, "Do people hate us because we're poor?" And she wrote about the silence she'd grown used to, the silence that followed every slight, every dismissive glance, every moment she was made to feel less. And then she wrote about him, the man who didn't shout, didn't show off, but stood still when it mattered, who made space without demanding attention, who gave her son something different to remember. She ended her post with a sentence that came to her without thinking. "Some people throw punches, others just hold the line so the rest of us can breathe." She hit post, not expecting much. Within an hour, it was shared 100 times. By morning, it would be 10,000. But more than numbers, what returned to her were messages, stories like hers, from strangers across the country. And in that quiet flood of voices, Aaliyah realized something. Maybe she hadn't just survived that moment, maybe she had reclaimed it. A week later, the buzz had started to die down, but the impact hadn't. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Vin pulled into the lot of the North Shore Community Center, a modest brick building tucked between a laundromat and an aging church. He wasn't there for cameras or headlines. He hadn't given a single interview since the video went viral. Slung over his shoulder was a duffel bag filled with old gear, sparring gloves, gym shoes, extra wraps, stuff he no longer needed but knew someone else might. It wasn't about being seen, it was about showing up. He didn't expect to see anyone he recognized, but as he stepped inside, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Vin?" He turned. Standing near the playroom entrance was Aaliyah, clipboard tucked under one arm, the other resting gently on Malik's shoulder. She wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back, her eyes brighter than before, like someone who'd finally exhaled after holding her breath for too long. Malik clutched a juice box in both hands and looked up at Vin, solemn as ever. "You helped my mom," he said quietly, as if he'd rehearsed the line all week. Vin crouched and nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I guess I did." Without another word, Malik turned and walked back to his mom's side, sipping like his job was done. Aaliyah laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes more from relief than humor. "He's been practicing that all week. Said he wanted to tell you himself." Vin shifted the bag on his shoulder. "Thought some of the kids here could use this." Aaliyah nodded. "They will. And thank you for more than that." They stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the echoes of children playing in another room. No cameras, no headlines. Just two people who had seen each other in a moment that mattered, and still remembered why. In a world that often forgets, they hadn't, and that made all the difference. Vin didn't stay long at the center. After he handed off the gear to the front desk volunteer and nodded a quiet goodbye to Aaliyah, he stepped back out into the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long gold shadows across the pavement. He paused beside his car, reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded sheet of paper Aaliyah had slipped to him moments earlier. He opened it slowly, carefully. Her handwriting was neat but unpretentious, the kind that spoke to someone used to filling out forms, signing permission slips, writing reminders to herself. It was a letter, part reflection, part promise, written for Malik. In it, she spoke about what it meant to survive with your head held high, even when the world tried to push it down. She talked about fear, about shame, but mostly about love. The final line read, "He'll know he's enough, not because the world told him, but because I did." Vin folded it again, even slower this time, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Then he sat in the driver's seat of his car without turning the engine on. No music, no phone, just stillness. He thought about his own mother, standing in grocery store lines just like that one, about how he'd watched her navigate cruelty with clenched teeth and quiet strength, about how no one ever stepped in back then, and how that silence had stayed with him, etched into his bones. The world had moved on already. The hashtags had faded, the media had shifted to a new headline, but this moment, this simple human act, still pressed gently at the center of his chest. Later that evening, his phone buzzed with a text from Briggs. "They still want you on Oprah. Every outlet's calling." Vin didn't answer. He just looked up at the soft dusk sky through the windshield and let the quiet settle. This wasn't a movie. There was no closing scene, no speech, no score. Just a boy who had found words to thank him, a mother who no longer looked down, and a man who had once felt powerless, but now knew the weight of standing still. Not for show, not for headlines, just because it was right. And that, for him, was enough. The story of Vin Diesel and Aaliyah Monroe reminds us that true strength doesn't always come from loud voices or bold actions. It often comes from quiet courage in the face of injustice. In a world where cruelty can be casual and silence can feel like consent, one man's calm decision to step in changed everything. He didn't need recognition, applause, or validation. He simply chose not to look away. The lesson is clear. You don't have to be famous to make a difference. You just have to be present. Whether you're the one being humiliated or the one watching from the sidelines, every moment offers a choice. Stay silent or stand up. For Aaliyah, being seen, truly seen, restored a piece of dignity the world had tried to strip from her. For Malik, watching someone defend his mother will shape how he views justice and self-worth. And for those who watch the video, a single line, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving," became a rallying cry. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is hold the line, not to fight, but to create space for someone else to breathe. And that is a lesson we all need to remember.